Good evening. NATO has finally given a more detailed account of its part in the bombing of refugees in Kosovo 5 days ago. It's admitted its warplanes bombed 2 separate convoys, believing them to be military targets, but now accepts the bombs probably killed civilians. RAF Harrier pilots had radioed a warning there were refugees in the convoys, but the warning wasn't passed on. Nick Witchell, on the day NATO came up with a new explanation, but wouldn't accept that it had done anything wrong.
This is the video NATO had hoped it would never have to show, and this is the story it had hoped it would never have to tell. How the most sophisticated warplanes in the world dropped laser-guided bombs on tractors and trailers. Because the truth, now revealed, is that NATO aircraft did attack this location and this one. Its mitigation, its pilots believed at the time and still believe that military vehicles were present. NATO's findings were presented by the senior officer who's conducted their inquiry.
We are now convinced that in the first incident we struck a valid military target. It was a vehicle directly involved in the burning of homes.
That first attack was on vehicles northwest of Jakovica. The local time was 1:10. A US Air Force F-16 pilot cited what he believed were Serb military vehicles in the courtyard of the C-shaped building he could see in his bomb site. 2 laser-guided bombs were dropped. This is the aftermath. The wreckage in the background is that same C-shaped building. The second attacks, to which NATO has not admitted before, were some miles further east and nearly an hour later. NATO pilots spotted a convoy of many vehicles.
The lead elements of the convoy had several characteristics of military movement.
Overhead, the fighter aircraft were in radio contact with their airborne command center known as ABCCC. They were discussing whether this was a VJ, that is a military convoy, or a civilian one.
Roger, we just received word that this is a VJ convoy. How copy? Great. Give me all your players. Saab, are you still airborne? ABCCC, I want as many fighters as I can get now.
This is the result of that decision. NATO aircraft launched 7 separate attacks on vehicles which the pilots and their controllers were convinced were military. But the pilots were all at altitude, and they were basing their identification on cockpit video screens which were just 4.5 inches square.
As we watch these videos in the comfort of this room and on a large display, it appears possible the vehicles are tractors, are tractor-type vehicles. As I reviewed the tapes with the pilots, they agreed. However, they were emphatic that from the attack altitude to the naked eye, they appeared to be military vehicles.
But not every pilot over Kosovo that afternoon thought that this was an entirely military convoy. It appears British Harriers warned that there were civilian vehicles there too, but the warning was never passed on.
There have been reports of British Harrier pilots seeing a convoy and identifying it as having refugees. This occurred at approximately the same time, but they were not in communication with the aircraft in question.
The full truth of what happened may never be known. What can be said, though, is that last Wednesday, people who had already suffered grievously became the victims of a terrible mistake. Nicholas Witchell, BBC News.
The Serbs are claiming NATO's latest airstrikes are threatening ecological disaster. A big pall of smoke has been hanging today over a bombed chemical works. And the Serbs say air raids on oil installations have created a huge oil slick in the Danube. John Simpson in Belgrade on NATO's assault on Serbia's industrial heartland.
The persistent attacks on oil and chemical plants here over the past few days have taken a considerable toll on the industrial and military capability of Yugoslavia. But they're also, it seems, taking an ecological toll as well. Serbian television uses this for its propaganda purposes.
NATO bombing of chemical plant in Pančevo created huge clouds of poisoned gas that spread over the town and carried by the wind further towards Belgrade, jeopardizing lives of more than 2 million people.
In fact, circumstances have so far prevented any serious effects on the people of Belgrade. All the same, there is a fear among scientists that an ecological disaster could happen. Serbian television continues to highlight the victims of the war, in this case a 3-year-old girl in the village of Batajnica, who the Serbian authorities claim was killed by an anti-personnel cluster bomb. And at the ski centre of Tornik Zlatibor, hit perhaps by accident, a woman searches the wreckage for her missing son. These pictures are satellited out of Belgrade by Serbian television, which is of course heavily controlled by the government, with the express intention of weakening NATO's resolve. But the actual cases and the personal tragedies involved seem genuine enough. John Simpson, BBC News, Belgrade.
The UN says it's concerned about the fate of hundreds of thousands of refugees thought to be on the move inside Kosovo. It's believed some of them may be being forcibly prevented from leaving, while others are thought to be hiding in the mountains and woods. Over the weekend, 35,000 refugees flooded into the Albania town of Kukesh, but today just a handful managed to get through. Jeremy Bowen is there. Jeremy, who's stopping these refugees from escaping and why?
Seems pretty certain that the Serbs are stopping the rest of the refugees escaping because they're, of course, the people who control what's going on there on the ground. I was up at the crossing point today. It was eerie and rather spooky. Where there had been thousands of people crossing over the weekend, there was now nothing. It was as if a human tap had been turned off. There's speculation about what might have caused it, but the fact is only the Serbs in Kosovo and the refugees themselves know. And, of course, this will deepen concern for what's happening to all those people.
But briefly, Jeremy, are the agencies expecting another wave of refugees eventually?
We've been told by the UN here that there are about 800,000 displaced people within Kosovo. Some of those are apparently being shelled at times by Serb units. They're heading for the woods, they're in the fields, they're trying to hide. And the UNHCR also believes that there are big waves of refugees trying to get into Montenegro, Macedonia, and possibly here as well.
Jeremy Bowen, thanks. The Foreign Secretary, Robin Cook, has warned President Milosevic that NATO won't allow the Serbs to control Kosovo once the refugees return. Mr. Cook told MPs that an international protectorate should be set up, which could be run by the United Nations. He was speaking during a debate on the conflict in Parliament today, where a growing number of MPs expressed doubts about the conduct of the war.
Outside Downing Street, Serb sympathisers have been urging NATO to get out of the Balkans. But just down the road, as MPs had their chance for a say, Mr. Cook warned they'd fight on until the uprooted refugees were free to return. So long as President Milosevic ruled, then Kosovo would have to become a kind of international protectorate.
Its administration will need to be placed in the hands of international bodies, including the UN, the OSCE, and the European Union. The task of reconstruction, both of the shattered villages and of a democratic society within Kosovo, will take the combined efforts of all those organizations.
A growing number of MPs voiced worries about results so far. The tone of the Tory front bench was sharper.
Although I would be the last person to minimize the impact of the NATO campaign, we must nevertheless face facts. And one of those deeply unpalatable facts is that NATO's primary objective to prevent a humanitarian disaster has not been achieved.
Some backbenchers went further.
So far, his policy has been a disastrous failure. He's united the whole Serb nation behind Milosevic, and he has not saved the life or home of a single Albanian refugee.
The Scottish nationalists, opposed to airstrikes, called for an oil blockade instead.
Apparently, the oil blockade has not happened because of doubts about its legality. It would, say some, require a UN resolution. Is it conceivable in this world that a bombing campaign can take place for almost 4 weeks without UN sanction, yet an oil blockade cannot be implemented for lack of one?
But the Liberal Democrats insisted tougher action would be needed.
The threat, and indeed perhaps the use of ground forces, will be an essential component in the achievement of any settlement.
MPs aren't querying ministers' motives, but they are voicing concerns about the clarity of NATO aims. With the debate still going, Labour whips are seeking to prevent a vote. Public splits, they fear, could only benefit the Serbs.